Era's journey into Dust Devil Creek had begun in the depths of despair. She had come not seeking new beginnings, but to let grief wash over her until nothing remained. The gasp that echoed through the crowd was followed by a stunned silence. She had always seen herself as a woman broken beyond repair, but now, in the face of adversity, she found courage. Lily, the oldest, became her right hand, practical and serious, helping repair the barn and learn the skills necessary for survival. The truth was out, and Thorn's empire was collapsing. The farmers, once too afraid to stand up to him, now saw the opportunity to restore what had been stolen. Thorn, now a prisoner of his own greed, was taken away, and with him went the tyranny that had plagued the valley for so long. The people of Dust Devil Creek were free at last. The spring beneath the Miller farm was theirs, and with it came the promise of a future. Era's pledge to share the water with the community was a promise of hope, of renewal. And as the valley began to thrive once more, Era stood with Lily, Daisy, and Rose, watching the land that had once seemed like a curse transform into a home. The grief that had once consumed her had been transformed into a fierce love, a love that had given her the strength to fight not just for herself, but for a future. The broken woman who had come to Dust Devil Creek to die had become the mother and protector of a new family, and together they had created a legacy that would live on for generations. The sun set on the valley, and for the first time, Ara felt the warmth of home, a place built not on sorrow, but on courage, love, and the unwavering will to survive. Daisy, quiet and watchful, became a silent strength, her ability to find edible roots proving invaluable. And Rose, the youngest, with her laughter and innocence, helped to heal the broken parts of Era's heart. But despite their efforts, the shadow of Thorn loomed over them. The townspeople, afraid of Thorn's wrath, refused to sell Era the supplies she needed. She was systematically starved out, forced into isolation. The town had been corrupted by Thorn's greed, and his control over them was absolute. Era knew they had to find another way to survive. That night, as the winds howled through the empty valley, Era went to the spot where Lily had pointed out a mound of earth. With her hands blistered and raw, she dug, driven by a desperate need to find something, anything, that could change their fate. Hours passed, and just as the first light of dawn painted the sky, her shovel struck something hard. It wasn't stone, it was wood. Heart pounding, she unearthed a small, metal-bound box. Inside, wrapped in the years of dust and decay, was a letter from the girl's father, Thomas Miller. It revealed the terrible truth. The land they had been living on was not worthless. It was sitting on top of an artesian spring, and Thorn had known it. He had murdered Thomas Miller and forged a deed to steal the land, hoping the girls would die without ever realizing what they truly possessed. Judge Thorn's malice was immediate as he turned on Era, mocking her for daring to challenge his authority. Thorn would stop at nothing to protect his empire. His thirst for power had already led him to murder, and now, with the truth in her hands, Era was more vulnerable than ever. Thorn's next move was to offer her money to leave. $500 a fortune for a woman like Era. For a brief moment, she considered it. The temptation to leave, to escape the relentless struggle, was overwhelming. But then, she looked at Lily, Daisy, and Rose, at their hope, their belief in her, and she knew she couldn't run. This land, their land, was theirs by right. Thorn's offer was not a gesture of kindness. It was an ultimatum, a command. But Era stood firm. She would not sell out, not for money, not for safety. The land was not for sale. Thorn's smile faltered, replaced by a look of pure fury. He moved to claim his victory by force, but just as he raised his hand to signal his men, Silas appeared, rifle in hand, followed by a dozen farmers armed with hunting rifles. They had finally found the courage to stand against Thorn's tyranny. Thorn's world was unraveling, and in the face of the farmer's resolve, his power evaporated. She had nothing, no property, no status, nothing to offer in this transaction, except a dead-s contract that had promised her room and board. But with an unshakable resolve, Era invoked the law, claiming the promise that had been made to her. Thorn's fury was palpable, but his pride kept him from backing down. With a venomous hiss, he allowed the auction to proceed, and in that moment, Era became something more than a woman lost in grief. She became the protector of those who had no voice, the guardian of the helpless. As she led the girls away from the cruel spectacle, she felt her life shift. She was no longer waiting for her own end. She was fighting for a future. The desolate Miller farm, with its burned-out remains and rotting timbers, stood before her as a symbol of the impossible task she had taken on. The barn was all that remained, a decaying shell of a life once lived. But Era wasn't deterred. She was determined to make this place a home for the girls and herself. The first night, they huddled together in the barn under a threadbare blanket, and Ara, for the first time, felt the crushing weight of her decision. She had taken on 3 lives, and yet she could barely care for herself. The next morning, reality set in. They had no food, no resources, and no way of knowing how to survive in this barren landscape. When Silas, Judge Thorn's foreman, arrived with a warning about the land's unpaid taxes, Era stood tall. She refused to be intimidated. She would protect the girls, no matter what. A woman who had buried her own child. Era signed a mail-order bride contract, not for love or a new life, but for the solitude that could quiet her sorrow. But fate had a cruel twist in store. The man she was meant to marry, Eudodia, had succumbed to a fever, leaving her with only a dusty train ticket and the hollow promise of a life that would never be. The town council, led by the cold, calculating Judge Thorn, had no use for a woman without a husband, declaring her a vagrant and ordering her immediate departure. With no prospects, no family, and no future, Era seemed destined to fade into the pages of a forgotten life. But everything changed when she witnessed the auction of 3 orphaned girls. The Miller sisters, Lily Daisy and Rose, stood on the platform, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, their arms wrapped around each other in fear. Their parents had perished in a fire, and now they were to be sold to the highest bidder. The town had turned its back on them, and Judge Thorn, with his predatory charm, planned to seize their land, a small, dry piece of earth that bordered his vast empire. As the crowd remained silent, too afraid to speak out, Ara saw the reflection of her own brokenness in the girl's eyes. She saw the same abandonment, the same desolation that had driven her to this town. And in that moment, something shifted within her. No longer was she just a widow and a grieving mother. She was a woman with the power to change the fate of these children. Without thinking, her voice rang out, thin but clear, calling for the bid. Over the next days, as she struggled to teach the girls how to survive in this harsh land, Era began to find something new in herself. The knowledge of the spring, the truth of Thorn's treachery, was a weapon, but Era knew it was also a danger. The final blow came when Dr. Adams, the town's doctor, arrived with proof, the original deed, the document that exposed Thorne's lies.